November 20th, 1759, a storm raged across the coast of Brittany. Gale force winds, towering waves, rain and spray reducing visibility to nothing. Every rule of naval warfare said ships should seek shelter. Every experienced sailor knew fighting in such conditions was suicide. Ships would founder, masts would snap, crews would be swept overboard. Admiral Sir Edward Hawke, commanding 23 British ships of the line, watched the French fleet fleeing into Quiberon Bay, a treacherous anchorage full of rocks and shoals even in calm weather. The French had an invasion army waiting, flat-bottomed boats prepared to carry troops across the channel. If the French fleet escaped, Britain would face invasion, but pursuing into that storm, into those dangerous waters, meant risking the entire British fleet. Hawke's officers urged caution. Local pilots refused to enter the bay in such weather. The safe decision, the sensible decision, was to wait out the storm and resume the chase later. But Hawke looked at that fleeing French fleet and said 5 words that would save Britain. I would not lose the opportunity. This is the story of the Battle of Quiberon Bay, the only major naval battle ever fought in storm conditions. The day when Admiral Hawke chased the French fleet into a rocky bay during a gale and destroyed it. And the victory that completed 1759, Britain's year of miracles, by preventing the French invasion that would have changed history. Welcome to Britain's history. Today we're covering the battle that proved British audacity and seamanship were unmatched, because Quiberon Bay wasn't won through superior numbers or better ships. It was won through one admiral's willingness to risk everything, and British sailors' ability to fight and win in conditions no other navy would have attempted. But before we get to that storm-tossed battle, before we watch French ships sink and run aground while British ships pursue through impossible seas, we need to understand what was at stake. Because without knowing the French invasion plan and the year of miracles context, you can't appreciate why Hawke made the most audacious decision in naval history. And if you're enjoying this, subscribe. We cover the battles that defined Britain, the victories against overwhelming odds, the moments of extraordinary courage, the decisions that saved the nation. Let's go back to 1759, a year that would become legendary in British history. The 7 Years' War had been grinding on since 1756. Britain and Prussia faced France, Austria, Russia, and Spain. By late 1758, things looked grim. French armies threatened Prussia. British expeditions had achieved little. The war was expensive and unpopular. The government faced criticism. Public morale was low. Then 1759 began, and everything changed in ways nobody could have predicted. In August, at Minden in Germany, a combined British Hanoverian force defeated the French army in spectacular fashion. British infantry, against all military logic, advanced through a barrage of 60 French cannon and shattered the French cavalry. It was a victory that proved British tactical excellence. In September, at Quebec in North America, General Wolfe's assault on the Heights of Abraham defeated the French and secured Canada for Britain. Wolfe died in the moment of victory, a heroic death that captured the British imagination. And in November, at Quiberon Bay, Admiral Hawke would complete the triumvirate by destroying the French fleet and saving Britain from invasion. 3 major victories in 1 year, 3 different theatres, Europe, North America and the Atlantic. 3 demonstrations of British military capability. Land warfare, colonial conquest and naval supremacy, all proven in a single remarkable year. 1759 became known as the Annus Mirabilis, the Year of Miracles. Church bells rang across Britain after each victory. Public confidence soared. The war that had seemed unwinnable suddenly appeared to be turning decisively in Britain's favour. But in November 1759, the miracle at Quiberon Bay hadn't happened yet, and Britain faced an existential threat: French invasion. France had assembled an invasion army in Brittany and Normandy. Thousands of troops, hundreds of flat-bottomed boats designed to cross the channel quickly. The plan was straightforward. The French Atlantic Fleet, based at Brest, would escort the invasion force. French troops would land in Scotland or southern England. With British forces committed in Germany and North America, the homeland would be vulnerable. If the invasion succeeded, Britain might be knocked out of the war entirely. Britain's defence rested on the Royal Navy's blockade. Admiral Sir Edward Hawke commanded the Western Squadron, the fleet responsible for bottling up the French in Brest. It was miserable duty. The western approaches to France were notoriously stormy. Ships had to maintain station off a hostile coast in all weather. Supplies were difficult, crews were exhausted, but the blockade worked. As long as Hawke's ships watched Brest, the French fleet couldn't escort the invasion force. Hawke was 54 years old, an experienced officer known for aggressive tactics. He commanded at the First Battle of Cape Finisterre in 1747 and had a reputation for pursuing enemies relentlessly. His philosophy was simple: engage the enemy decisively, don't let them escape. That philosophy would be tested dramatically in November 1759. The French fleet at Brest numbered 21 ships of the line under Admiral Hubert de Conflans. Conflans was a competent officer commanding veteran crews, but he knew the British blockade had trapped him. He needed an opportunity to escape, a gap in the British coverage, a storm that would drive Hawke's ships away, something. That opportunity came in early November. Hawke's fleet, low on supplies after months at sea, had to withdraw briefly to refit. Conflans learned of this through intelligence and seized the chance. On November 14th, 1759, the French fleet sailed from Brest, heading south toward Quiberon Bay, where the invasion transports waited. Conflans' mission was clear: collect the invasion force, escort them across the Channel, and deliver French troops to British shores. The fate of the war, and Britain itself, hung on whether he could succeed. But Hawke returned to station faster than Conflans expected. British scouts spotted the French fleet on November the 20th. Heading south along the Brittany coast, Hawke immediately ordered pursuit. His 23 ships of the line came after the French at maximum speed. It was a general chase, every ship racing independently to catch the enemy, the fastest arriving first, the slower following as they could. This was aggressive tactics at its finest. No careful formation, no cautious approach, just relentless pursuit of an enemy that couldn't be allowed to escape. The problem was the weather. November in the Bay of Biscay is notoriously dangerous, and November 20th, 1759 was worse than usual. A storm had blown up overnight. Gale force winds from the west, heavy seas with waves tall enough to threaten ships, rain and spray reducing visibility. The kind of weather where experienced captains looked for safe harbour, not battle. Conflans assumed the storm was his salvation. No admiral would pursue into such conditions. He could reach Quiberon Bay, a large anchorage on the Brittany coast, and shelter there. His local knowledge gave him advantage. The bay was treacherous. Rocks, shoals, tidal currents that could wreck ships unfamiliar with the waters. British ships wouldn't dare follow. Conflans would be safe, and when the storm passed, he could resume his mission. But Hawke didn't follow conventional wisdom. When his officers pointed out the dangers, the storm, the rocky coast, the treacherous bay, Hawke's response was immediate and uncompromising. I would not lose the opportunity. The French invasion fleet was the target. If Conflans escaped, he'd collect the invasion transports. British shores would face attack. The strategic stakes outweighed the tactical risks. Hawke ordered his fleet to pursue into Quiberon Bay, despite the storm, despite the rocks, despite every reason to wait for safer conditions. This decision was revolutionary. Traditional naval doctrine emphasised caution. Admirals who lost ships to storms or groundings faced courts-martial. The sensible approach was to wait, maintain distant contact, resume pursuit when weather improved. But Hawke understood that sensible approaches sometimes lost wars. If the French fleet escaped, the strategic consequences would be catastrophic, regardless of how safely the British fleet had behaved. Hawke would rather risk his ships in pursuit than watch the French invasion succeed, because he'd been too cautious. The pursuit continued through the morning. The British van, the fastest ships, gradually closed the distance. The French rear began to straggle. Conflans, on his flagship Soleil Royal, saw the British coming and couldn't believe it. They were pursuing into Quiberon Bay during a storm. They'd run aground. They'd wrecked themselves on the rocks. He kept heading for the anchorage, confident the British would turn back at any moment. They didn't turn back. By afternoon, the British van reached the French rear. The battle began in the worst possible conditions for naval combat. Ships heeled over in the wind, decks at dangerous angles, waves crashed over bows and swept along decks. Rigging strained, masts creaked. Gun crews worked soaked and exhausted, trying to load and fire cannon while waves threatened to wash them overboard. The lower gun ports, normally opened for the heaviest cannon, had to stay closed or water would flood the gun decks. Ships were fighting at reduced firepower in terrible conditions, but the British pressed the attack. HMS Resolution engaged the French Formidable. Multiple British ships surrounded the French warship, pounding her with broadsides despite the heaving seas. Gun crews reloaded mechanically, even as water washed across decks. Officers shouted orders that were barely heard over wind and waves. Formidable fought back courageously, her French crew matching British determination. But she was overwhelmed by numbers and firepower. She struck her colours, surrendered, and was taken as prize. A British crew put aboard to secure her, despite the continuing storm. HMS Torbay caught the French Thacy. The French ship, desperate to return fire with maximum effect, opened her lower gun ports to bring the heaviest cannon into action. But in those mountainous seas, opening the lower ports was fatal. Water poured through the openings, the gun deck flooded. The sea, taking on tons of water with every wave, quickly became unstable. She heeled over sharply, capsized, and sank within minutes. Most of her crew went down with her. Over 600 men drowned in storm-tossed waters with no hope of rescue. The British ships couldn't stop to pick up survivors, even if they'd wanted to. The battle was still raging, and stopping meant becoming stationary targets. It was a brutal reality of naval warfare. Sometimes the sea killed more men than enemy guns. HMS Swiftsure engaged Superb. British broadsides, fired at close range with deadly precision, despite the conditions, smashed into the French ship's hull and rigging. Superb's masts came crashing down, torn away by British fire and the force of the wind. Without masts, she was helpless, unable to manoeuvre, unable to escape. She began to founder, water pouring through shot holes and damaged seams. Within minutes she sank, taking another French crew to the bottom of Quiberon Bay. French sailors struggled in storm-tossed waters, clinging to wreckage, calling for help that wouldn't come. British ships couldn't stop to rescue them. The battle was still raging, survival was uncertain for everyone, and tactical necessity demanded they press on. Conflans tried to rally his fleet, but the situation was hopeless. British ships were throughout the bay, pursuing individual French vessels with relentless aggression. Some French ships tried to escape into rivers and shallow channels where deep-draft British ships couldn't follow. Others ran aground deliberately, preferring to wreck on rocks than be captured. The French Soleil Royal, Conflans' flagship, tried to escape but ran aground near the mouth of the Vilaine River. The French admiral had to transfer to a frigate and flee, leaving his wrecked flagship behind. As darkness fell, the fighting gradually stopped. British ships anchored in Quiberon Bay itself, an incredible demonstration of seamanship. They chased the French into dangerous waters during a storm, fought a battle in impossible conditions, and then anchored safely in an unfamiliar bay in darkness. The skill required was extraordinary. Hawke's captains and crews had performed at the highest level under the worst circumstances imaginable. The storm continued through the night. Winds howled, seas remained mountainous. French ships that had run aground were pounded by waves. Some broke up completely, others were damaged beyond repair. The storm that Conflans had hoped would save him instead completed the destruction the British had started. By morning, the extent of the French disaster was clear. 6 French ships of the line had been sunk or captured during the battle. 7 more had run aground, and many of those were total wrecks. The French Atlantic Fleet had been destroyed as an effective fighting force. The invasion transports at Vannes and Morbihan remained blockaded and useless. The invasion plan was dead. Britain was safe. British losses were remarkably light given the conditions. 2 ships had run aground but were later refloated. Casualties were minimal compared to the French. The victory was as complete as it was improbable. Hawke had pursued into a storm, fought in impossible conditions, and destroyed the French fleet while protecting his own. It was a masterpiece of aggressive naval warfare. The strategic consequences were enormous. The French invasion of Britain was cancelled permanently. The invasion army in Brittany was disbanded. The hundreds of flat-bottomed boats were left to rot. French naval power in the Atlantic was broken. Britain's naval supremacy was secured for the remainder of the 7 Years' War. And the victory completed 1759, the year of miracles. Quebec in September, Minden in August, Quiberon Bay in November. 3 victories that transformed the war and established British dominance across multiple theatres. The victory also validated Hawke's aggressive pursuit doctrine. Traditional naval tactics emphasised caution, formation, and avoiding unnecessary risk. Hawke had shown that calculated aggression, pursuing relentlessly, engaging decisively, accepting tactical risks for strategic gains, could produce overwhelming victories. Nelson would later adopt similar approaches at the Nile and Trafalgar. The pattern started at Quiberon Bay: trust your captains, pursue aggressively, engage the enemy closely, don't let them escape. For Britain, Quiberon Bay meant immediate safety from invasion and long-term confidence in naval superiority. British sailors had fought and won in conditions French sailors couldn't match. British seamanship had proven superior. British audacity had triumphed over French caution. The message was clear: the Royal Navy could fight and win anywhere, in any weather, against any odds. That confidence would sustain British naval power for decades. For France, Quiberon Bay was a disaster that ended any hope of directly threatening Britain. French naval power never recovered fully during the 7 Years' War. The invasion plan was France's best chance to change the war's trajectory, and it had failed catastrophically. French strategy had to shift entirely. No more direct threats to Britain, only indirect pressure through continental alliances. British naval dominance was acknowledged and accepted. The battle also demonstrated the importance of leadership. Hawke's decision to pursue into the storm was controversial. Many of his officers thought it reckless, but Hawke understood the strategic picture better than his critics. He knew that caution would lose the war even if it saved the fleet. He trusted his captains to handle their ships in terrible conditions, and he was proven absolutely right. The victory justified the risk. Hawke became a national hero, celebrated for saving Britain from invasion through bold action. Modern military analysts study Quiberon Bay as an example of operational art, understanding when tactical risks serve strategic purposes. Hawke didn't pursue into the storm because he was reckless. He did it because the strategic stakes demanded it, and because he trusted his fleet to perform under pressure. That combination, clear strategic vision, plus confidence in professional competence, is what separates great commanders from merely competent ones. The battle also highlighted British naval professionalism. Ships of the line were complex machines requiring hundreds of skilled sailors to operate effectively. British crews were trained to exceptional standards. They could handle their ships in storms. They could fight while waves crashed over decks. They could anchor safely in unfamiliar waters in darkness. That professionalism, built through years of blockade duty and training, was the foundation of British victory. French ships were individually capable, but French crews couldn't match British seamanship under extreme conditions. Quiberon Bay's legacy extended through British naval history. When Nelson pursued the French to Egypt in 1798, he was following Hawke's example of relentless pursuit. When he attacked to anchor in Audacious Bay, he was demonstrating the same willingness to accept tactical risks for strategic gains. The aggressive doctrine that characterised British naval warfare for 50 years traced directly to lessons learned at Quiberon Bay. Pursue relentlessly, engage decisively, trust your captains, don't let weather or caution prevent victory. Today, Quiberon Bay is overshadowed by Trafalgar in popular memory, but for contemporaries it was equally significant. It saved Britain from invasion in the immediate term and established naval dominance for the long term. It completed the year of miracles that transformed the 7 Years' War, and it proved that British audacity and seamanship were unmatched anywhere in the world. That November day in 1759, when Admiral Hawke chased the French fleet into a storm and destroyed it in conditions no other navy would have attempted, was the day British naval supremacy became unchallengeable. The French invasion fleet that threatened Britain was wrecked on the rocks of Quiberon Bay, and the admiral, who'd risked everything to pursue them, saved the nation through one bold decision. I would not lose the opportunity. If this is the kind of history that matters to you, the victories won through audacity and skill, the commanders who risked everything for strategic goals, the moments when British professionalism proved superior under impossible conditions, then you know what to do. These are the stories that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching Britain's history. The battles that shaped a nation, told the way they deserve to be told.